Hey there, Groovesters, Groove Stars. Ridgely here with another Lessons from the CEO, and I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by a dear friend. We go way back, long time ago. A tremendous business growth strategist, worked with some of the biggest names in the business, author, powerhouse, mentor, my man, Mitch Russo. Thanks so much for taking some time with us, brother. Really appreciate you.
Oh, my pleasure, Ridgely. Great to be here.
So take us back. Were you always an entrepreneur? Did you start out of the corporate route and make the move? What was your story? Tell us what was the journey for you?
Well, it depends how much time you have. You want the short version or do you want the long version or
We'll go
somewhere
with
in
the
between?
reasonable version. How about
Uh,
that?
all right, sure. All right. So let's go back and to the point when my life changed. I was a teenager and I was in high school and bored in high school, had a rock band, got involved in hard narcotics, shooting heroin, 16 years old. So for me, this was obviously, I didn't know this at the time, but it was basically a death sentence. And I was destined to be dead 6 months later when an event happened, and that event shaped my life. That event was a moment in time when I was about to put the needle in my arm and the phone rang. And I picked up the phone and I said, hello, hello, hello. And there was nothing there but clicks. But I thought it was a person, so I kept saying hello. Well, by the time I realized that it was a mistaken call or something and hung up the phone, the needle had gelled solid. So, what does that mean? I had about 10 seconds away from putting into my arm counterfeit heroin, which was probably rat poison. And that phone call saved my life.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's where my journey really started. And I sat and I cried for 20 minutes because I realized that my whole life in that very second was just decided. And I had a choice. Do I want to go back and continue to use drugs and shoot more heroin, or do I want to go forward and become a human being and productive member of society? And I chose the drugs, obviously. No kidding. I chose to be a productive member of society. And that led me into a mission of self discovery. And it was through that self discovery that brought me to the point where I realized I was more than what the five senses could reveal. And I needed to find out where I was and how that is true. And I did. And eventually, when I finally did take a job after I had studied electronics in Northeastern University in school, I ended up working for folks, and I realized as much as I loved the work, I hated being an employee, and I'm sure you can relate to that as well. And so, on a casual breakfast, and this comes from the idea that synchronicities bring the right people together at the right time. I had a new neighbor move in next door to me, and we went for breakfast. Next thing I know, I find out that he is absolutely a superstar programmer who's 5 commercial applications under his belt. And I had an idea for a software product, and I shared it with him. I had no idea that he even really did anything like that. Next thing I know, 6 weeks later, he calls me up to his study, shows me a mock-up of the idea I had presented to him. And I said to him, so you want to start a company? Just like that. And he, just like that, said, yeah, just like that. And that was it. That was the beginning of Time Slips Corporation. Time Slips Corporation grew from a $5,000 check that we both put into a joint bank account. And that grew to 250,000 customers and an 8-figure liquidity event about 9 years later. And that's how my professional life really started. It was building my own company. And as you know, when you enter a venture like this, the emotional ups and downs are insane. People would definitely think you're crazy if they were to watch you during this process. Talk about manic depressive, or bipolar. I was all of those things and more, but I had one simple thing in my mind. It was the confidence that I had that I could do this. I didn't know if I would get it done in time before we ran out of money, or I didn't know if I'd be able to survive it, but I knew I could do it. And I just kept going. And there's so many stories from that era, and I'm sure you have them as well. But what happened is I sold the company. The company was bought by Sage PLC in the UK. I then ended up transitioning my brands to Sage, and then Sage brought me on as their chief operating officer, which I ran for a total of 2 additional years after my earnout. When I moved back to Massachusetts, I didn't have a clue as to what I was going to do. I wasn't really looking to start another company or anything else, but all I did at that point was reintegrate into my networks that I had left behind. Next thing I know, I have people coming over to me and saying, "Hey, Mitch, you just did this amazing thing. Can you help us do it too?" I became a coach. And that was the beginning of my coaching journey. And it's kind of I've been on that path ever since I got back from Dallas, Texas, after selling my software company. And I've loved it. I've built tools for coaches. I've built coaching programs. And then I went on after that to, as you know, work with Tony Robbins and Chet Holmes. And the 3 of us built Business Breakthroughs International. We ended up scaling that from almost 0 to almost 30 million in revenue before Chet died. And when Chet Holmes passed away, I told Tony that after 5 years of the ups and downs of Chet's cancer treatment and illnesses and all the different weirdness going on in that part of the world, I mean, I just needed a break. And I told Tony that I had to bow out. And he said, with my blessing, he said, "You did a great job. Thank you for all your services." And I left. Later, I ended up doing more stuff for Tony after I left as well. But bottom line is, it was a time for me to reflect on who I was and really what I wanted in my next stage of life. And that's when I started writing books.
Yeah, and so take us back a little bit there, because obviously, work with some of the legendary people in the industry side by side as a partner, and that's fantastic. And you've also had a chance to coach so many entrepreneurs that are out there. So if you're looking at that landscape, based on your experience, what do you think are a couple of the most important traits or characteristics of those entrepreneurs who succeed and do something meaningful?
So it's a great question, because when I first started coaching, it was hit or miss, to be honest. I mean, I would work with people and some would do fantastic and some wouldn't. And I remember back, it must have been 2001 or 2, or somewhere in that range. I remember working with a particular client who said to me after a very successful engagement, he said, "You never did anything for me. I don't know why you charged me all the money that you did." And I said, "What are you talking about? Your revenue's gone up 40%. Your number of customers has increased by 60%. And he goes, "What are you talking about? That's not true." I said, "Of course it's true." And I realized that I had not tracked his progress from the beginning of our engagement to the end. So I started creating tracking systems. And one of the things that went along with tracking systems was accountability. And for me, my secret to success is combining goal tracking and accountability with a very clear and logical direction as to what priorities are. So when I work with a new client, one of the things that I do is I go into a 2-hour business mapping session. And in this business mapping session, I'm exploring every element of a particular new client's business. And then from there, I'm looking at what the possibilities are for expansion, rapid expansion and growth. And then I map those out too. And then at the end of mapping this out, I then prioritize with my client what should be done first, second, third, et cetera. And then we agree on what would be the desired outcome of each of these priorities. And I record all of these. Now, when I started doing this, it became a mess of spreadsheets and notepads and databases and calendars. So I started looking for coaching software, couldn't find any. So I did the most ridiculous thing anyone could ever imagine. I decided to create my own coaching software platform. And that changed my life. Now, all of my clients work with me through Clientfolio. Now, coaches all over the country use Clientfolio, all over the world use Clientfolio too, for tracking their sessions, for documenting everything that gets done, and for making sure that their clients are staying accountable. So for me, that was a game changer. And that alone, whatever it is you coach on, if you're not holding people accountable and tracking goals weekly, numeric goals, real goals, not like, oh, how do you feel this week goals. I'm talking real solid goals. That's how you know you're making progress. That's how you know your own value as a coach. And by the way, that's how you get the best testimonials. And that's how you raise your prices.
Yeah, exactly. So in that sense, what do you think is the biggest error or setback that holds people back from succeeding as entrepreneurs?
So there's two parts to this. And one part you might say is somewhat innocent, and that is that most folks that I run across, particularly at the lower level, newer business owners, they're just overwhelmed. There's just too many particles flying through the air for them to stop and really understand what's happening. Particularly as a company starts to reach about $1 million, it starts to get out of control. And so usually what I would do is I immediately take a look and see, well, let's break down what you do into functions. Let's take those functions, compartmentalize them. Then let's build a job book for every single one of those functions, and let's get a part-time person to handle that. So that's step one, and that usually solves that particular problem. But then there's another, and it's an insidious problem, and that is mindset. There are people who are in their own businesses with the belief that they can't succeed. And I am not, I'm okay at mindset coaching. I can pretty much spot what's going on with somebody pretty quickly, but I have a mindset coach on my team. And so what I do immediately is when I realize I'm dealing with a mindset issue, and there are certain types of mindset that are very, very dangerous. You're familiar with gaslighting? You know the term gaslighting?
Well, let's make sure we explain it for everybody's benefit.
So gaslighting is when someone you care about, a loved one, a husband, a wife, a family member, degrades you with statements that you don't seem to see as degrading at first. It's almost like a unconscious control. And in a business, and if a business is failing and if the CEO is competent and is pretty much able to focus, there might be a gaslighting issue in the family or in their circle. And if you find that, these are the kind of problems I love, because you find that, uncover it, and expose it, for the most part, the problem's solved. Person understands that they're being gaslit, and from there, they can no longer respond to those triggers. Now, if it goes deeper than that, that's when I use Hallie, my mindset coach, who then comes in and works with that individual, typically for 1 or 2 sessions, and we're back on track.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what about yourself personally? Have you had any setback that comes to mind, either small or colossal, that grabs you, that really taught you something interesting or unique?
My God, have I had any setback?
Pick one. Pick whichever one you like most.
Oh my goodness, there's so many, I don't know where to go. I mean, look, the bottom line is that all of us start things with great expectations, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of energy, and then they don't seem to materialize as quickly as possible. So there's a part of us that gives up. Even if we physically don't give up, if our actions still take place, there's a part of us that actually gives up. And unfortunately, being human, that's happened to me several times. Years ago, I built a different coaching platform that I just could not get people to use. It was a great idea, but I probably poor execution and frankly terrible marketing. So that was a huge setback. I invested a bunch of money in getting that to work, and it just never worked. But then from that, And this is really where the concept of pivoting comes into place. From that, what I learned, and a good percentage of the code that we used to build that went into building Clientfolio, which now is a successful coaching platform and a viable company. So it's one thing to have a setback. It's another thing to give up. And as you know, if you pivot after a setback, then you're taking what you just learned and hopefully growing from that and utilizing it to grow further. And that to me is an example of a setback. I can go, I mean, look, I have 2 divorces under my belt. I have, lots of mistakes in investing. I've been ripped off on crypto. I mean, for heaven's sakes, Ridgely, there's been so many setbacks in life, but I'm not alone. Everybody has stuff like this. It's just part of life, right?
I got that two divorce thing too. All good. So obviously you work with Tony and Chet, legendary figures. How important do you think it is for entrepreneurs to find those mentors, those coaches to help them move to the next level?
I think it's essential. I can't tell you what coaching has done for me as a business owner. I mean, I had a coach when they didn't call themselves a coach, but they were my mentor when I was building Timeslips Corporation. I'd never really been a business owner before, but a senior person took an interest in me and became a very dear, close friend, and also happened to be our corporate counsel as well. So for all the hours he invested in me in coaching and never charged me, the small reward was that we gave him all of our legal work to do, of which, there was quite a bit at the time. So in my opinion, it's almost ridiculous to go about starting, building, scaling a business without a coach. And the reason is because what you're buying when you spend money on a coach is time compression. When you buy time compression, you're compressing not your time only, but everyone in your company's time too. And my goodness, that is so important. So
So
important.
talk a little bit about that time compression. Talk a little bit about how important that is and why the coach makes that possible that you can't really do on your own.
Sure. So if you go down a pathway, and I'll speak in general, then I'll get very specific. If you go down a pathway and you're not really sure where you're going or how it's going to work out, but your attitude is, I'm going to find my way, I'm going to get it done, just like my attitude was with Timeslips Corporation when I first started, then, it's likely that you eventually will get it done. But if you only have a short period of time, maybe because of financial constraints or whatever, then you need help. And it would only make sense that, you don't really learn anything without somebody teaching you something. And sure, there's free videos on YouTube that you can kind of learn from. But at the same time, we all know one thing very important. Content has become pretty much free. So great knowledge is free, but coaching and mentorship are really where rubber meets the road. Now, I'll give you an example. I have a book out, it's on my screen, it's called Power Tribes. And Power Tribes is really about building certification programs and scaling them to 6 to 7, sometimes 8 figures. Well, the truth is that book's been out there for 5 years, and a few people have probably built, scaled, and actually launched their certification program just by reading the book. But it's only a few. That's why I've set up a coaching and mentorship program for people who want to do that. Now, am I adding additional information that's not in the book? Of course. I have processes, spreadsheets, mind maps, flowcharts, things that would help my clients really scale their certification business that's not in the book. But at the same time, even if I gave them those things alone, they wouldn't do them. So if you combine what I said earlier about goal tracking and accountability with a solid set of processes leading roadmap style from step 1 to step 10, say, that's how things are done. That's how real accomplishments are made. At least in my world, that's how I've done it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And side by side with that, what value do you place next to coaching and mentorship on the individual's initiative to go after personal development, professional development? How key is that?
I've never really known a successful person who hasn't invested in personal development. And sometimes it's the larger part of their coaching investment in personal development. I mean, sure, I'm not talking about going to the gym or health coach, which is great. I'm talking about someone really coaching you on developing yourself as a human being, becoming a better human being. So when I first started Timeslips Corporation, my only goal was financial. I want to get rich. I want to make a lot of money. That's the goal of starting a company. But it clearly and quickly became, I want to help a lot of people. I want to take the people that work for me and I want to scale their abilities and develop them as human beings, as managers, as leaders. Then I want to help my community. I want to share what I've learned through this trial and error process of growing, scaling, and building companies with my community to help them too. So this whole issue of personal development gets a backseat and sometimes is called dirty words like woohoo, like, oh, that's a woo-woo thing. But woo-woo is really the key to many people's success because they've figured out who they are.
I especially think that going back to what you said earlier, that plays such a huge factor in the mindset side and the mindset stuff, man. That woo-woo stuff, call it whatever you want, but I'm a junkie, man. I'll tell you, I'll be a junkie for that forever.
Yeah, me too.
And love it. So I love this question. If you could hop into a time warp and go click and jump back 25 years and speak to a younger version of Mitch Russo and share some thoughts, some ideas, some counsel, some guidance, whatever you want to call it. What would you want to say, knowing that, hey, it's been perfect, the journey was what it's supposed to be? That's not a good enough answer. So what would you want to say to younger Mitch, based on what you know now?
Sure. So the advice that I would give myself, if I could go back 25 years, is stop thinking so short term. Back then, particularly if we go back 25 years, even after I sold the company, which was my longest term thinking ever, I was basically moving from thing to thing to thing, and I was thinking short term. I even ended up thinking short term in some of the investments that I made at the time, or some of the relationships that I had at the time. And I would tell myself, stop thinking short term. Short term is not going to help you in the long run. Long term is. I'll give you a simple example. When I was in my 20s, my dad I paid my father back a loan. I borrowed $2,000 and I called him up and I said, Dad, I want to send you the 2,000 back. Thank you again for the loan. And this is for the first time. I've done it several times. And this first time he said to me, Mitch, why don't you take that $2,000 and why don't you buy a dividend paying stock and just put it into your account? And I said, well, okay, Dad, what stock do you want me to buy? And he goes, I don't know, but just make sure it's something conservative that pays dividends. And I said, oh, sure. So I called up my friend who was a stockbroker and show you how unsophisticated I was financially. And I said, my dad just told me to do this. What should I do? And he goes, well, let's put you in a nice, safe utility. And I said, great. Okay. Well, what do you recommend? And he recommended a particular stock. And I sent him the $2,000 and he invested it in that one stock. And then I moved and I lost the company that we invested the stock in, lost my address or something. I got disconnected from that broker. Long story short, it was 20 years later that I figured out that I had this account and I went to find it. And that $2,000 had turned into six figures, basically. And it was only because it had been sitting there building dividend after dividend, growing and scaling without me messing with it. It was my accidental longest term investment.
That's fantastic. That's such a great story and so real. Yeah. I started, to give you a sense, I started my kids coming on webinars with me talking about what is money when they were 3 and 5 years old. And I'd bring them on And I taught them some very fundamental things, like, for example, how do you want to be, Camille? Debt-free, Dad. And to this day, my daughter, who's now 23, hates debt,
Yes.
pays everything off as fast as possible. So it sticks somewhere down in there, some of these things that because I didn't have anybody to teach me that, but I thought at least I can pass it on since I learned it from the School of Hard Knocks.
Right.
That, right. All
Right.
right, man. So got to ask this question because it's just so topical these days. What's your take on AI, the future of AI, where AI is taking us, and how important is it for the entrepreneur to pay attention to?
So I was I was lucky enough to get exposed to a guy who started an AI weekly training group back when Chat GPT was in its very earliest stages, probably over a year ago. And I liked him. He's a smart guy. And I said, I'd like to join your group. So I did. And I started taking his advice. As hard as it was for my old 70-year-old mind to figure out and do, I started doing it. And what happened for me, and this is a very common journey for people who get started with AI, is I had a holy shit moment. And where I had to back away from the computer and say, what the hell is going on here? And when I had that moment, then I knew that AI was going to be integrated into just about everything I do. And I've continued to learn. I've continued to build my own GPTs. I've continued to learn with him and with others now. And I see a future where I could basically have a company of agents that basically execute for me. And I'm not there yet. I haven't done that yet. I'm not even sure I ever will, but I'll tell you this, I'll know how to do it in the next few months because that's where I'm headed with this. I also have another project. I may have told you about this privately, but I'll share it with your audience. I have been writing a science fiction trilogy for the last 10 years. And in the last year, I have been using Claude AI as a writing coach. So I'll tell you exactly how that works. I would upload a chapter into Claude and I would say, please tell me if you see any inconsistencies, if you see any flaws in character development, if you see any drop or change in the pace that should not be right, that is not right. And of course, please map this chapter into the hero's journey story format and show me where it sits. That alone has changed the entire outcome of my work. And I don't have it create copy for me or write my words for me, but there are times when I'm sitting there and I'm just stuck. And I just upload the chapter and I say, what are the possibilities here? What can this character do to overcome this situation in a way that is relevant to the rest of the story? And, boom, 6 different possibilities.
I know, man. It's amazing. I remember when 3.5 came out and I was playing with it initially and started writing and I had this moment. You'll love this. This moment of, hey, man, I can write better than this. I can write. And then 4.0 came out and it kept improving and whatever. And a number of months back, I remember thinking to myself, you know what, Ridgely? You can no longer write better than this. You used to be able to write better, but now you can't. And yesterday, it's fun when I worked with a new client yesterday, did a workshop, and within 2 hours, we created landing pages, sales pages, websites, email sequences, social media posts for TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. And by the time we were done, it was 61 pages of content created in 2 hours because we first took the time to teach AI what it was we were looking for, self-evaluate, kind of like what you're talking about, and then put out the output. And the people were like, how did you possibly do that? And my answer was, I didn't. I used a tool that is incredibly powerful, that is changing the world, and we probably ought to pay attention. And by the way, I love that story of what you're doing with your trilogy. I think it's just fantastic. And I think it's going to serve you really well. and I can't wait to read it. So just let you know, put me on the list, the early bird list. I want to be on that list.
You got it. You're on the list. Let me add one more thing to that, because I love what you're doing as well. But here's what I've discovered. And this again goes for me and what I do. No matter how much help I get from AI, or any form of artificial intelligence, it cannot write in my voice. I have uploaded my videos, my podcast episodes, and it can come close. It can sometimes duplicate some of my tone, but I never can like take the output of AI and use it. It must be touched by me in a way that makes me feel like it's mine. Now, maybe other people can just, spit it out and use it and it works great for them. For me, I have not been able to do that. The next stage that I'm now moving into is using AI video. So I am going to be releasing a series of videos of a Mitch avatar teaching. Now, I've already created a Mitch GTP that has encompassed all of the knowledge in all of my books, which will make available to my clients at some point in the future as well. But I think the next stage here is audio and video, where we really can, I mentioned that the trilogy that I'm writing, one day I want to upload the trilogy into AI and I want to say, I would like you to animate every single character and script it as a movie and then produce the movie. And it might say, well, that'll take us about 5 minutes now, Mitch. So please hold on.
I know, man. It really is that crazy.
Yes.
All right, brother. Final question for you. And I love to get this because it's amazing what I learned from this question. It's if you had to recommend three resources, three books, three movies, three podcasts, whatever it might be, that would really help a budding entrepreneur, what would they be and why?
Okay. So the first recommendation is going to be more along the lines of what we talked about before, personal development. If you're listening to Ridgely and I have this conversation and you have not read The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho, then you're missing out on a huge step in your own development, I believe. It was for me anyway. So I love that book because what it really comes down to is it shows you that your true gifts are literally right under yourself, inside of yourself, and you don't have to go anywhere to find them. That's probably the greatest discovery I made. It's also a beautiful book and beautifully written.
I have right on that shelf right there every single book Paulo Coelho has ever written. Right there, right over there.
I love it. I love it. I've read many of his books, probably not every one. As far as business books go, I have to go back to the classic, which is my friend Chet wrote, which is The Ultimate Sales Machine. And I feel as if The Ultimate Sales Machine is as fresh and vibrant and relevant today as it was when he wrote it many years ago. And I love the concepts in the book. I found them to be practical and straightforward. And I also love the fact that he wrote them. And in the original version, not in the current version, but in the original version, I was quoted 4 times in that book. So because I had been a testimonial for him and all these other things, he used me as examples. So for me, that was a great book. It talks about sales philosophy and processes, and all about those things too. But the bottom line for me is that if you are taking a book like The Ultimate Sales Machine and simply following the steps, you can make enormous progress. Now, I want to also tell you my third choice. Have you ever heard of a man named Mo Gaudet?
Yes.
Okay, so Mo is one of the former Google executives. And he unfortunately lost his son. And he lost his son at an early age. He was an accidental death. And he wrote a book called Solve for Happy. And again, if you've not read this book, it's magical. And it's as important a business book as anything else. Because besides helping you understand your own happiness, it helps you understand how to keep clients happy. What is important to the people you work with. So, and by the way, his podcast is unreal. It's amazing. Just type his name into Audible or into YouTube or into any podcast platform, and you'll spend hours just in amazement of this man's incredible wisdom.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you very, very much. As we're wrapping this up today, final words from Mitch Russo to all of the budding entrepreneurs out there, whether they're budding in experience or budding in years or whatever it may be. What would you leave us with?
Again, failure is when you quit. When you quit, you're done and you failed. However, if you simply learn from what you've done and the mistakes you've made and pivot into something else, then you won't fail. You'll just continue to move closer to your goals. So I would say stick to it, get help, get as much help as you can possibly get, and see that vision as clearly as possible. And don't let anyone ever talk you out of it.
Thank you very much, Mitch. Obviously, team, you know what to do. Hit the link, hit the button, go check out Mitch's stuff, buy the book, do all the stuff that you know you're supposed to do to continue on your journey. Thank you very much for my very good friend, business growth strategist, Mitch Russo, for spending some time, giving some wisdom to all of us. We deeply appreciate you. Thank you.
My pleasure.